questions standing up here.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and we'll continue on with our special council meeting that was started earlier just ahead of our in-camera meeting authorization. We have two items for our strategic session and then a formal motion that we need to pass further to the item that we dealt with back a few weeks ago. So the first item on our agenda is the Compass Kitchener, I guess, I don't know what you call every 4 years, it's a quadennial or something, a report that we get, and Mr. Leighton Collins, the chair of Compass Kitchener, as well as Curtis Brown from Environics are here, and they'll be providing us with a PowerPoint presentation and answer questions to the report. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mr. Collins. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mary, and council and staff. Today I'm going to spend just a minute or two to provide a recap about Compass Kitchener's mandate to validate the priorities that you're going to hear about in a lot more depth in the next minute or two, so that we can support, create, lead the processes to identify what the community's priorities are and identify the action items that can be taken by council and staff to create those priorities into tangible realities. Since these priorities are one of the primary determinants of the City of Kitchener's strategic plan. So, the goals, again, just as a quick recap, is to provide the high-level indicators of the city's public trust and satisfaction with the activities that the city undertakes. Capture any significant shifts in those priorities along the way, and as a result of that, identifying any new or different expected outcomes that arise from those shifts, and then generate further ideas for the city to take action upon. What you're about to hear from Environics in a lot more detail is that they conducted a telephone survey of the community's residents, 18 questions, 15 minutes. It achieved a statistically representative sample to get a high-level view of what the priorities are for the community and enable us all to make some important strategic insights or get some important strategic insights from that. There is also some follow-up engagements planning that are taking place as a result of the Environics survey. And we're taking that qualitative research data to ensure that the citizens' voices are heard and continue to be heard, and with the objective of creating that greater awareness and greater expectations amongst the community and for all of us as stakeholders in all of this. So that's all being done through a comprehensive community engagement plan, and that will be part of the Your Kitchener, Your Say initiative or strategy, and we'll be following up with that in the next few minutes after you hear from Curtis Brown from Environics. And with that, Curtis.
Welcome, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, councillors. It's a pleasure to be here once again to present the results of the Compass K survey for 2018. We've been pleased to serve as your research insights partner on this particular initiative for many years now, and I know my colleagues have been here in the past to present results in previous years, and we're very happy to once again be here and provide you with some of the insights from the survey that we conducted this year that will guide the strategic plan going forward. This survey, as I say, it builds on a very strong foundation of public opinion research. We use the same very highly refined methodology to get a statistically valid and representative survey of Kitchener residents. We spoke to just over 1,000 residents by telephone, including both landline and cell phone numbers. And we, in addition to, without getting too deeply into the details of it, in addition to making sure that it's represented by things like what part of the city and gender, we also use geodemographic household data that through our sister company, Environics Analytics, to have PRISM, to sample by PRISM category. That's basically 68 different categories that Canadian households fall into. In your report, which you have in front of you, there's a more in-depth discussion where it talks about what PRISM is and how it works and some of the different characteristics of households in Kitchener that you're able to see there in terms of how it breaks out. And we use that to make sure that it is especially representative when we're doing a survey of this nature. Of course, the other aspect of it is that we included a number of questions that have been asked in previous years in this survey. So we can see really how residents' perceptions have shifted over the last, on some of the different key strategic priorities over the last 5 years. So I want to share with you, first of all, I think what really is very good news from this survey, something you should all be very pleased with. When it comes to some of these key municipal metrics in terms of how people feel about the direction of the community and where things are going, we see that nearly 8 in 10 residents are either very or somewhat satisfied with the city's performance. We also found that 2/3 of residents say that Kitchener is heading in the right direction. And on both of those things, the number of people who are happy with the city's performance and who also think the community is on the right track, it's actually gone up over the past 5 years since the survey was last done in 2013. And the other thing I want to mention just about those particular two metrics is that they also are a little bit, we ask the exact same question in other municipalities in the greater Golden Horseshoe region, and what we see here for Kitchener is actually a bit above what we see in some of our other research. So that I think is also a very positive finding for Kitchener. The one area where there's potentially a bit of room for improvement comes to and perhaps a bit of a concern is how the city spends tax dollars, and particularly how it informs residents about spending. We see in the survey this time that 78% of Kitchener residents feel that they receive excellent or good value for their tax dollars, which is quite good. Again, it's a bit higher than what we see in some other municipalities. But the proportion of residents who feel that they get either excellent or good value has actually gone down slightly since 2013. Keeping taxes affordable is also one of residents' top priorities for the future. And we also found that only 1/3 agree that the city does an excellent or a good job of explaining how their tax dollars are spent. And so these findings and some of the other findings that you see on the infographic on the screen there, related to open government and accountability, I think demonstrate how the city must work hard to clearly and simply show residents how it is spending money effectively. And I think, and if that is done and that communication takes place, I think we will see that if we're doing the survey again in 5 years from now, that the number of people who feel that they receive good value should go back up. Looking at the strategic priorities, so this is where we asked people to rate whether these priorities are either a top priority, a secondary priority, or not a priority. This is in the bottom left-hand of that slide. We find that residents are most likely to emphasize improving the roads that they drive on and fixing the pipes that bring water to their homes. That's their top priority. And that really shouldn't come as a great surprise, I don't think. I mean, infrastructure is a core service that the city provides, that everyone relies upon, and a significant proportion of residents recognize also that developing a plan to extend the life of these important physical assets is one of the key accomplishments that have taken place over the last 4 years. And at the same time, we also see in that list of broad priorities that 2/3 of residents say that the environment is a top priority. The environment is also a major issue in the sense that when it comes to future goals, majorities of residents, they want the city to reduce impact on the environment, and as well as strengthen the urban forest, which I understand you're going to be talking about in a little more detail fairly soon, and also prepare for the challenges and the risks associated with climate change. Meanwhile, economic development is still it's still a high priority. It's one of the ones that a majority of residents say that it is a top priority for the city, or should be a top priority for the city. But we noted that the number of people, compared to when this was done in 2013, the number of people who say that that's a top priority has actually gone down a fair bit. At the same time, though, we do see that Kitchener residents still emphasize specific economic development activities. They really want to see the city both support existing businesses and also attract new companies to the city. And a similar proportion also say that the city needs to work hard to attract and also retain talented people to live in Kitchener. And then the final thing that was a key finding from the survey, and we look at some of the data, is that although this isn't a service that the city delivers directly, public transit is a major public concern. When we ask people on an unaided basis what the top issue is facing the city, they talk about transit. It comes out well ahead of things like the cost of housing and also development and infrastructure, which was also the similar pattern to what we saw 5 years ago. And some of the other things that we saw in the data is that improving transit options is definitely important to residents. Within the city, that means support for the goal of building neighborhoods that are both transit-oriented and walkable. And then also beyond Kitchener, one of the things that we noted is when it comes to economic development achievements over the last 4 years, a significant number of people believe that, or they recognize rather, that securing a provincial commitment to better rail service to and from Toronto is a significant milestone that's been achieved. So I've just given you a very brief snapshot overview of the data, and of course you have the full report in front of you. If you have any questions about it now, I'd be happy to take those before we continue on with the rest of the presentation.
Okay, we do have some questions, so thank you for the presentation thus far. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you, Curtis. I just want to make sure that I'm not asking questions sort of before you get into the meat and the potatoes of this. But when a question is asked about value for municipal tax dollars, and I know that you really want to be careful when you're asking a question like that, because you don't want to be giving the responder, you want them to really, dig into their own thoughts about that, right? But should there be some kind of a definition given to the questionnaire, to the person who's responding to the survey, of what does value for money mean? Because I think value for money can mean, I think if you talk to 10 people, each one of them would say something completely different. Mm-hmm. I mean, and to just grab that number out, that's not a statistically significant number. But just, just based on what I hear in my own community. Mm-hmm. So is that, it sounds like people are feeling somewhat that we are. I look at the very good of value for money. I look at the fairly good value for money, which is still 54% feel that it's fairly good. That's still a little bit more than half the population is feeling also that it's not that good. Mm-hmm. So going back to my original question.
Yeah, and thank you very much for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. What I would say about that is when it comes to something like this, the definition of value is going to be subjective to some degree, and it's going to depend on how the person feels. And so in this case, we don't want to define specifically what value is, because that could be a little bit different for everyone depending on which particular programs and services they care about, what their orientation is in terms of, that they're the sort of person who wants to keep taxes as low as possible. Do they want to see city funding or programs enhanced and therefore taxes to be higher? So we leave it kind of as we leave it as minimal, I guess, in terms of not wanting to lead the respondent too much when they're answering the question. And I would say I don't want to, and I apologize if I left you with the impression that these aren't great results in terms of how people feel about the value that they receive, because you're right, we do see here that again nearly 8 in 10 do feel that they get good value to some degree, and a lot of people will kind of end up in that soft middle of saying that they get fairly good value as opposed to very good value. No one likes paying taxes too much, obviously, but by and large, and when we look at this compared to other research that we do in other municipalities, this is a pretty good result, even though, like I say, it is down slightly from where it was 5 years ago.
And I misquoted my number. I'm sorry when I said something about that we're not happy. I was looking at the number the wrong way. So one more question then before you get further into it is the right track question. Again, it's very subjective as to what people feel the right track is. And we don't want to lead them,
No.
but we still want to have an understanding of what the right track is. Did any of the respondents give you your questioning staff an idea of what they thought right track was, or was that ever an opportunity?
No, through you, Mr. Mayor, no, they didn't do that. They don't have the opportunity with something like this to answer the question or provide that kind of qualitative feedback, which we tried to capture a little bit with some of the other questions about, like, what advice would you use to improve the city, or what's the top issue. Those things are a little bit more qualitative in nature, and then also building on this, I think future engagement activities may get a little bit more into the definition of what that means. Really with a survey like this, really the value of it is very much to just get this is sort of to have the have the broad outline of how people are feeling, and of course there's always a lot more context and nuance. And it's difficult to be able to do that, to ask the questions in a way that would kind of bring that out, because it would be very difficult to follow or understand. So in this case, just by and large, we do see that the people are feeling that things are generally headed in the right direction. And we look at all the other data, I think that really kind of gives us an overall portrait of what opinion looks like on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. I love this data. Thank you for sharing it. I just was wondering, generally, 4 years ago, some of the feedback that was a bit surprising was that a lot of people wanted to see better accountability and transparency in the government, and we see some of that in people wanting to have better communication about where we spend our tax dollars. But did those words come up in the responses? Did people talk about transparency or accountability, or less so?
Not a significant. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Not significantly. There were, certainly some of the. You see some of the qualitative feedback. There was a little bit of that, but we really, when it came to sort of those questions around accountability, open government, transparency, we really tried to look at that through a few particular lenses, and both in terms of what are the things that people recognize as the achievements of the last 4 years when it comes to some of those things, and then also what should future goals be. And then I think the other part of it is just the question in particular around how good of a job does the city do in communicating how it's spending, and that was actually, that was a new question, and I think this is an important learning. I think when you kind of tie it to some of those other things around taxation and around people also wanting to be engaged and have those discussions, is that certainly it would suggest that there's some room for improvement, and that people do have a desire to know about what's happening and know about it in a really clear and comprehensive way, and also, recognize at the same time also recognizing that a lot of activities have been taking part in that regard.
Okay, and I was wondering, are you going to be getting into in the next part of the presentation some of the details about the breakdown of which demographic groups said what?
Not particularly within the presentation.
Okay.
No, that's.
So then, I just have a question about the direction of Kitchener government on page 2A-15, where you're talking about how those who are more likely to say that Kitchener government is on the wrong track include people with lower levels of education and household income. Mm-hmm. So then you also talk about suggestions. I forget which page now. About what. Here we are, page 23, where they are asked, well, what do you, are there other issues that you feel are important for the city to focus on? So do you have the data about whether or not those folks who were more likely to say we're not on the right track had suggestions for how we could get better on the right, get more on the right track?
Thank you for that, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, certainly. So when it comes to the, certainly with the right track, wrong track, I mean, certainly that is something that we found. And in the conclusions and recommendations section of the report, we do speak about that there certainly is a sense among, people, with sort of, lower levels of household income and sort of lower socioeconomic status, perhaps not feeling that things are going quite as much in the right direction. Their outlook certainly is not as rosy. And I think that's important to note because there is, a certain proportion of the population that I think might feel disengaged or disenfranchised to some degree. When it came to some of that open-ended suggestions for feedback, we didn't see anything specific, too specific to that group, but we did see a lot of patterns in the data that do suggest that certainly, there are the people who do tend to have, are maybe struggling a little bit or having a bit of a difficult time, generally do tend to not be quite as, feel that things are going quite as much in the right direction. But in terms of pulling out exactly specifically what they said could be better, I mean, we received a whole number of different responses that were very, very different and in terms of what people's perceptions were. So,
well, I'm just, sorry, I'm running low on time, I guess I'm just asking that we look at that, if through whether it's staff or Environics, I'm not sure, but I'd like to see, for those who are telling us, hey, no, you're not doing a great job, I'd like to know whether they have concrete ideas about what we could be doing better, because if we're not being perceived to meet the needs of those folks, then what are they suggesting we do differently is what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That'd be an opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I find your ranking of city priorities a little confusing. When I think of it, I would list everything, but you rank everything by city priorities. If I look just at the first one, city priorities, people say roads and pipes, 73%, that's the top priority. To me, that leaves 27% for everything else. And therefore, if you look at it that way, if you're only looking at one scale, then all of these other figures, like the environment, economic development, they would decrease considerably in number.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. I should explain a little bit kind of how that question is asked and how it works, because I can see that. So basically what happens is that the respondents read all of these different options for different strategic priorities in a random order, and for each one they have to say whether it's a top priority, a secondary priority, or not a priority. And based on the results of that, we really try to analyze it by how many say it's a top priority. So in this case, for example, respondent could say that one thing is a top priority, two things are a top priority, six things are a top priority potentially, but we do see a bit of a spread, and so I mean at the end of the day, I think what this does tell us and what it shows that when it comes to that core infrastructure, that's the one that people say yes, that's the absolute top priority. The largest percentage of people say that's a top priority, and then from there we see some of those things. We see higher proportions of people are saying that it's either a secondary priority or not a priority, which suggests that perhaps it's one of those things that may still be important to them to some degree, but certainly not to the same extent.
I hear you, but I'm still confused. No, I shouldn't say that. Basically, our roads and pipes and that are our constituents' top priorities. And then, I go back, if I have to devote 73% to that, it leaves not as big an issue for the environment, for economic development, because you can only have one top priority, right?
Well, in this case, people could have more than one top priority if they chose to, but which is why we try to look at it based on the number of people who say each of these 6 things is the top priority. And I'm curious because I would imagine no one probably knows better than all of you. To what, whether, when you're speaking to your constituents and you're going door to door and you're getting calls from people, which things are they talking about most of all? And I would imagine a lot of the calls that you get probably are related to, the roads, the pipes, that kind of thing. So it is interesting, sort of, and in doing this, we also wanted to make sure that it was asked consistently the same way year over year. So in some of these cases, we actually can see to what extent that priority is either tracked up or tracked down.
Okay, to what extent are people led when they're answering that question, if they're led at all?
We try not to lead them at all. We really work hard to make sure that the question wording doesn't lead them in a particular way. We just say, okay, in this case, we're asking that, saying that these are the cities, these are the focus areas for the strategic plan. And do you think this is a top priority, a secondary priority, or not a priority?
But they have all of those categories.
Well, they're given each one one at a time. So because if you were to ask this all at once, it might get kind of confusing, and people might get lost. Which priorities all did you mention? So that's why we try to do them separately, and we also always ask them in a random order. So it's not like they're always getting asked roads, pipes, and water mains first. They may get something else, and that way it removes some of those biases from the questionnaire.
Okay, quickly, I'm running out of time. I have just a question on your PRISM models. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's wrong with the ward that I represent, but they're only singled out on 2 out of 55 singles. Is there something wrong in that Ward 3, that they don't?
Sorry.
All of these other wards are singled out as we go through all of these PRISM segments. Does that what does that mean?
Well, what it means is so with the PRISM segments and the PRISM data, basically that means that it's to what extent those particular segments are more likely to be found in them. In this case, it would seem that for Ward 3, based on in some cases we see higher concentrations of different segments in different wards. Ward 3, if it didn't stand out, that probably means that there wasn't any particular segment that stood out more than the others. You kind of have a mix of everyone. So
I don't have any standouts in that ward. I just want to ask you one final question, and it all depends on the way you look at things. And we have a chart here. The first one, satisfaction with Kitchener government, and you state that 8 in 10 Kitchener residents are satisfied with the performance of their local government. Mm-hmm. And I look at it and I say 82% are not very satisfied. Mm-hmm. Am I correct in saying that?
It depends how you look at it. Certainly, what we try to do is because it's a 4-point balanced scale, we usually will take very and somewhat satisfied together and add those. But I mean, certainly we do look at the intensity of that satisfaction. And so you're right. I mean, in this case, we have only 18% saying that they're very satisfied. Most people, again, kind of end up in that soft middle, where they're most likely to say that they're somewhat satisfied. They're not 110% satisfied, essentially. So, again, when it comes to kind of, what you sort of hope to have happen in the future to improve is perhaps, certainly maintain the overall level of not very and somewhat satisfied, but maybe also get the number of people who are very satisfied up.
But that big gray area in the center, which is somewhat satisfied, that leaves a lot of room for movement.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Interesting to note that Councillor Gazzola's questioning on top priorities, and your answer basically is that it could be 2 or 3 top priorities as an answer, and I can understand that, but I think where he was getting at is that of those 2, 3 top priorities, which is number 1? You've got to have a number one out of 2. You got to work with one of them first. So maybe that's where he was coming from. Anyways, my question to you comes down to a comment that you made in regard to the lack of explanation, or maybe poor explanation, of the city on taxation in terms of how we are spending our money. And I sort of puzzled by that comment in that, we got media coverage, when such budget comes out, all the details are what's proposed, and as we go through each meeting, there's, write-ups about it. There's information put on our websites by staff in terms of all the details, et cetera. And yet, when I look in the gallery, we have people there from different groups and agencies wanting to be sure that they get their, support and money that they were looking for, and yet there's only 2 people from the public. And so I'm just wondering are they really that concerned? No, there's no shows yet, or do they not understand, or do they not read? Help me out. Maybe look into that a little deeper for me.
Sure. No, thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. With this, I think it's an interesting finding because it's a new finding and it does tell us something about how people feel about spending. And one of the things I find, no matter what we're asking about, especially we do a lot of public opinion research when it comes to what governments are doing, how they're performing, how people feel about their spending, and the truth is, people aren't always, they aren't always fully aware of what's happening. And I know in a lot of cases, like a lot of effort will be made to publish information and do different things and really trying to get that out there. But yet, in a lot of cases, awareness will not really be that high. People won't necessarily know. So when people say that they only think that only 1/3 think that the city's doing an excellent or good job, that may not reflect the job that the city is doing, which is why I wouldn't want to necessarily convey that the city's doing a poor job, because I don't think that's what this finding is. I think this finding may also just be what people's perceptions are, and because they're not hearing about it, aware of it, know about it, that could be why they're saying this. And it might not necessarily just, it isn't necessarily just about, something that the city is doing, but it's sort of, I think, from the perception of how people feel about the city's spending and what's happening, that kind of communication and information is vital, and it's a very difficult job in order to do that and convey that to people. But I think this does tell you kind of how people feel about it, and that there is always room to try to inform people to a greater degree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a couple of questions. By the way, I really appreciate the depth of your survey and all of the work done by Compass Kitchen. So I don't want to be negative or critical. But I was particularly interested in the sections of your report on page 2A8 and page 33 that deal with neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. Your survey was done in April, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it's very positive from neighborhoods. Are you aware of the level of dissatisfaction in some neighborhoods about not being involved in the planning procedures in parts? And because your survey seems to indicate the opposite, the situation, but it's a recent situation, I'd grant you that, where there are a group of communities currently in the midst of forming a group because they're very unhappy with the involvement with the city. Can you explain that for me, or is it just your survey too early, or?
Thank you for that question, through you, Mr. Mayor. I can't speak to that 100% for sure, because one of the things with the survey, even though the survey is very, very representative of the city overall, and we look at the results by ward and we make sure that we sample by different segments, it's still too small of a number to really, too small of a sample size to really drill down to very specific individual neighborhoods. I know Kitchener, I can't remember the number of neighborhoods that the city has right off the top of my head, so I wouldn't be able to speak to what it is. And even if I were, we're able to sort of say this is a finding now to the individual neighborhood level, the statistical margin of error on that would be so high that we wouldn't be able to really analyze that. We certainly look at things, but by city overall, of course, and by ward and different types of neighborhood, whether it's kind of an urban or a suburban neighborhood, and we've tried to, in the report that you have in front of you, we tried to flag all the findings that are significant by that. But there's, to what you're speaking about, there's nothing in particular that we found kind of at that level, because we just aren't able to pinpoint it to that degree.
You mentioned Ward 10 a couple of times, or a number of times, and yet this suggestion I'm making, it obviously didn't surface as you're surveying people in Ward 10.
Ward 10? Yeah. Yeah, when it comes to, some of the neighborhoods questions, no, you're right, we didn't, there wasn't anything that's, I guess there was one thing. When we talk about future priorities, developing neighborhoods where residents can walk to everything they need, that's slightly higher among residents of Ward 10, and that's on page 32. But that's the only one of those that is statistically significant to report on in this report.
I recognize that, but the category I'm talking about is the one ahead of it, planning for new developments around rapid transit stops.
Sorry, yeah.
That's what I'm pointing to.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But it's okay if you've answered my questions. I really appreciate your help.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the communicating of how we spend tax dollars portion. A big part of this is making some assumptions. So I think an important thing to consider, and I'm hoping to get your feedback on it, is, for example, if there are residents in the community that happen to receive this survey that didn't actively try to find out any information about how we spend tax dollars, how would they respond to that question?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, they could respond to that any way they wish, I suppose, in terms of what they feel their perception is. And so, yes, and to the earlier question that kind of ties into that there are many people, there will be many people who may be more informed and be more aware of what's happening and have that information, but but in many instances they will not. They may not be aware because they haven't actively sought out that information or been following it in the news or received something from the city. So their attitude is going to be based on their own impressions, and that's what this ultimately captures.
Okay, so in other words, I guess what I'm trying to get at is if someone didn't really make any attempt to receive any information, and we didn't, there's limited avenues for us to really go out and actively force them to receive this information, they may have a negative perception in terms of our outreach.
Yeah, it is all going to be based on that perception, absolutely, and that's the challenge of communicating that to people who aren't they're not necessarily following it closely. So, and that is one of the things. And we look at some. But at the same time, we also do see that when we ask about these things, especially in some of the areas around priorities for open government and accountability, there is nonetheless a desire to have that information, to get that information in about how the city spends and what it's doing.
Okay, very good. And my only other question is on economic development. I was actually pleasantly surprised to see it doing as well. Like I expected it to go down, but I was surprised to see it do as well as it did in this survey. So again, similar sort of question. 4 years ago, our unemployment was higher. It wasn't terrible, but it certainly was higher, and the economy was certainly not on the trajectory it was now. Mm-hmm. So is it a reasonable assumption to say that because people are satisfied, we should see that number decline somewhat?
Yeah. That was one of the things that when we looked at the results and we looked at it compared to 5 years ago, that was one of the conclusions that we had, was that was a time when there was more economic distress, and therefore people were more likely to rate economic development much higher. I think there certainly sort of suggests that there's a bit of an economic wind in the city's sales and the region's sales, and things are generally going fairly well. So although it's it's not certainly as high of a priority as it was, not as urgent as it was 5 years ago. It still is something that people want to see, and particularly, when we see when we drill down to some of those future goals, and we look at, people absolutely not only they want to support see support for the businesses that are here now, try to have, bring new industries, new companies to Kitchener, and also make sure that the city is attracting and retaining talented people to add to the overall social and economic fabric of the city. So those are certainly things that, even though the urgency may not be there that it once was, people still do see that as all those things as major priorities.
Okay, thank you, and I really appreciate this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Romanovich, and thank you for coming in. I always value this information. It's a good tool for us to use and judge where our citizens are interested. One of the questions, I want to ask is in regards to, I guess it would be on page 42 and 41, and it's the section that you have other, which is 32%. Mm-hmm. Do you have a breakdown of what the others is in particular, what percentages wise? Because the reason why I'm asking that is because I find it really interesting to see that Kitchener getting a GO train between Kitchener and Toronto, an extension of the ION system to Cambridge. So to me, that's interesting fact. So can you give me a little bit of an explanation with that?
Sorry, of the other or the
of the other, and because I wouldn't mind knowing what the percentage of residents see that as an importance, especially going towards Cambridge, which is rather interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that, and through you, Mr. Mayor. With this, I got it. Yeah. So I mean, essentially, the thing about this particular question is that this is actually a very difficult question to analyze from a survey point of view, as you can see. There are so many items. I mean, we're talking essentially, so any of those other things that kind of aren't included in here are 0.1%. I mean, it's one of those things when we looked at the data, it didn't necessarily group with some of the other things, which is why, sometimes if we did something like this and there were some things that were similar to transit or different things like that, we kind of collapse them into one category. But this was just such a broad question that it really wasn't possible for us to do that and sort of show that. We do have the full list of data, it's a very, very, very long bit of data in our in the data report that we provided, and we could certainly share that. And that's also why on the following page we have you see that very colorful number of bubbles there, which kind of shows you the relationship between different words when people answered that question and what they said. And that's really where we see some of those different combinations of words that are used more often. And yeah, like you say, one of the particular lines here, as you say, it's this quote, getting a GO train between Kitchener and Toronto, extension of the ION system into Cambridge. Those are two things related to transit that people gave on an unaided basis. And in this case, that's literally just one person. So it isn't like that is, something that a lot of people are saying together, but just to give you an idea, we just wanted to have this just so you had a sense of kind of how much variety there were to all the different things that people had in terms of advice, and then also try to give you some different ways of looking at how it all connects and fit together.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Selak.
I was just trying to understand when it comes to the percentages when you center out, whether it be South Kitchener Ward, that is, let me find an example.
On page 44.
Your 44?
Or my 44, I guess, yeah. Sorry.
That's okay.
The demographic profile question, the page?
Wards 3, 4, 5, and 6.
No. What I'm looking at, we'll just use page 24 as an example. It's not that. So if we're on your page 24, and we're talking about keeping tax levels affordable, and you have South Kitchener out as identified as 85%. I understand what South Kitchener, what words those represent. That means the average was 81, and that demographic specifically was 85%?
That's correct.
Okay, because there's a lot of those, and I just picked that one out for
Yeah.
whatever
No,
reason. So that's in addition to, I guess it's more of a comment. I just thought it was interesting, and I lost my page, but when it came to, here it is on page 26, when it was talking about securing provincial commitment to improve rail service between Kitchener and Toronto, the highest ranking came in at 28%, and Ward 5 came in at 41%. So that would have been the highest average, or highest percentage then, right?
Yes, that through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. So yeah, essentially when we're showing some of these things, so with Ward 5 residents, the 41%, that would have been higher than other wards, and it was, when we're looking at it by the ward level, we're only talking to 100 people in each ward, so there has to be a really significant. The margin of error is almost 10%, so I mean it has to be way higher than the rest of it to sort of be worth talking about. Otherwise, it's essentially just kind of statistical noise. So yeah, in this case, that's why we did flag that.
I just think it's really interesting because it's probably the furthest, or one of the furthest areas away from the rail system. So I just thought that was an interesting point. So thank you.
Thank you.
So those are all the questions that council had. I have some as well, Mr. Brown. And first of all, thank you for this great piece of work. I always look forward to it every 4 years because I think it is one of the more exciting parts of our strategic planning process, and one that actually gives us some quantifiable data that we can look at and study. I want to focus on the current snapshot and the fact that you had indicated that at 79%, the very somewhat satisfied with city government had gone up, and said that it was somewhat higher than what you're seeing in other cities where you've done work. I guess, do you have a sense of other areas when you compare Kitchener to other cities where maybe you saw some of the biggest differences?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor, and I would say that certainly, the satisfaction with Kitchener government, that is one area where, like I say, it was a bit higher. Certainly, that's one that really stands out. Some of the other things, around like taxation, spending preferences. I mean, taxes versus user fees. Those sorts of things, I think, were fairly similar to what we see in other municipalities, and so. When we look at this, we really look at it, in terms of, some of those first 6 questions, basically, of the survey. I mean, those are the core metrics, and really, I would say that those first 2 things, like I say, the satisfaction and the right track, wrong track question, that's where Kitchener does do certainly a bit better. It is as a higher than average than what we see in other surveys. And those are the only ones I can really kind of speak to. The other ones, like around taxation, were actually fairly similar to what we see. And then, of course, the other questions in here are not things that we ask in other municipalities. So I think in terms of, because, and we call them like those core benchmarks because I think that they really are, it's really and truly what they are. And they're a way for the city to really measure its performance and to know. Because absolutely, these numbers, without any kind of context, you kind of look at saying, okay, 78%, that's great. What does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? And I think, in this case, like I say, on those 2 are the ones that you really saw that it was that we do see it as a little bit higher than average.
And when you group, you indicated you group things like very and somewhat satisfied together and very and somewhat dissatisfied together on the other end. Is that sort of a conventional way of grouping things for people in your profession?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we call that top 2 box and bottom 2 box, and so top 2 box would be very somewhat satisfied, or very good, fairly good, or strongly agree, somewhat agree, and typically that's how it's done. And when we look at some of these sorts of things, particularly when we're looking at the perceived performance of government, or how people feel about a certain issue or topic, having that kind of, all the people who agree together, I mean, that certainly tells, I think, a really important story in terms of where that is. And then to the earlier question, that intensity, how many people are very satisfied versus somewhat satisfied, that can be a really important metric in terms of understanding and also trying to move the dial. Because if you have 80 or 90% of people who are very and somewhat satisfied, and we show that together, you're probably not going to be able to really get the number of people who are satisfied that much higher, because there's always going to be some people who are going to be dissatisfied to a degree. So then the goal then becomes, let's say only 20% or somewhat are very satisfied. You try to get to 30%. So like I say, increasing that intensity, making people feel, so it's not just it's good enough, but it's really great, and we're really happy with whatever this is.
So going down into the areas of focus, I'll be honest, I'm not surprised to see that list sort of as the 6 top areas that you've identified. On the environment side, I mean, in the past, we've always seen the environment rated number 1 or number 2 in terms of priorities, in terms of past survey work that we've done. But I do remember that one of the things that was unique in the past was that environment was 1 or 2, but that when it came to spending on the environment, it tended to drop down. Was there any work done this time around that sort of correlates the spending piece of it? Because it'd be interesting to see if that's sort of gone up or down, or if it's not there, then it's maybe something we can dig into.
Yeah, that's not something we specifically dug into, because we didn't include questions kind of around environmental spending. But I mean, we, certainly see that what people are looking for in terms of, like when we look at those future priority areas, the things like, the environmental impacts and the urban forest, and those are the sorts of things that we're getting people where people are more likely to say that it is a priority for improvement. Going forward, the broader point when it comes to the environment, and one of the things that we see in a lot of research that we do is, when it comes to, and this was more, it was more the case in the past, and I think it may be less so now, because certainly people see both the environment and the economy are equally important, and they have to work together, because one does end up impacting the other. But I mean, there have been times when historically, when it comes to, a lot of people would say in a survey, yes, the environment is important, or this particular environmental initiative is important, but then you ask people how, what about paying for that in some way? And then it would start to go down, or as an overall issue of concern, it would kind of go down, especially if there were economic concerns. If the economy wasn't doing so well, you'd see the environment go down, you'd go down a little bit. So I think that's kind of some important context to keep in mind when you kind of look at that, although I think, just given how discussion of the environment has been shaped over the last few years, and especially when people see things like the windstorm the other day, and other sorts of major things that could be related to climate change, and they also see not only is that the environment is no longer an abstract thing at that point, and so then we do see people saying that that's a priority and something that they want to see spending increase, or at least stay the same one.
On the question of economic development, if I add top priority and secondary priority together, we're at 89%. And I know this is something that sometimes we grapple with, because in terms of what's our role versus what's a provincial or federal role in economic development. This to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, would suggest that a good chunk of residents think this is something that council should be focused on, even though that number has, as you pointed out, gone down a little bit, and that may be by virtue of the reality of the economics now versus 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it still is certainly that people do see as being important. And like you say, we've seen that gone down. So the number of people who are saying it's the absolute top priority. But certainly, yes, this does suggest that for a lot of people, maybe it's not the absolute top, but it certainly is in the mix, because we do only see that 1 in 10 say it's not a priority at all.
But it is something we should be engaged in.
It still means that it's important. It's just maybe it's not absolutely front and center, top of mind.
Okay. Under the other priority areas, which were on page 23, it's some of the things that came up that I think were somewhat new to the mix, were focused around things like homelessness, drugs, and so on. Is this probably partially just because of the amount of discussion that's been going on in general in the media? And I would imagine it would have been around that time frame that this survey was done, around the opioid crisis and things like that. So those are probably at least something that some residents are thinking about?
Yeah, great point, and thank you for pointing that out, because it is something that we did notice. It was small in terms of the overall data, and then also you see when we asked the most important issue, things related to drugs, and again, this was totally open-ended, and people suggesting this. Issues related to drugs was now 4%, and that's never really been anything on the list in the last, in previous versions of Compass K. So yeah, when we did have an opportunity to suggest things, people could suggest different priorities. That did come up a little. Again, it's small, and it's, as you see, for the most part, most people didn't suggest anything. Like, they had the opportunity, and over half of people passed at that point. But it is something. Certainly, it is something that is an issue, certainly to some people. And because we're seeing that, even on the radar, even if it's very distantly off on the radar compared to some of the other issues like transit and the environment and economic development and infrastructure, it is something that we are seeing. And oftentimes when people do suggest things that are public priorities, and it will often be driven by what they read in the newspaper or what sort of the top issues of public concern are that are being debated. So yeah, I think that does that does factor into that here for sure.
Okay, wonderful. Those are all the questions I had. So we'll let you, I guess, continue the next part of your presentation.
Yes, I'm going to turn things back over to Leighton, and we'll just speak about the engagement aspect. So thank you very much for all your questions.
Thank you very much.
Great, Curtis, thank you very much for all of that. We're about to bring things full circle. A closed loop, if you will. So, as I was speaking briefly to in the opening remarks, is that we've got the community engagement plan that's being developed in greater detail as we speak, and over the past little while, and will continue throughout the summer. So the objective being to build on the results that you've already seen and heard, and to work through that so that we have a greater understanding of the expectations from all stakeholders in the community, from the mayor's office, councillor, staff, and citizens. The objective of that goal being to generate ideas to make progress on these expressed priorities. And again, as part of the tagline of Your Kitchener, Your Say. The timing is that this will progress throughout this spring. Phase 1 has completed. Phase 2 will continue throughout the summer, and the expectation is that we'll be presenting for these further results and details to Council on the meeting on September 24th. The tactics or the strategies that we're taking to do this at this point anyway, is to provide a variety of top-driven opportunities or topic-driven opportunities for people to contribute, because we appreciate different people have different styles that they're more comfortable doing than others. So as part of that, there's community focus groups that I believe have started or are about to start. Our plan. There's online, and as part of that, there will be online idea generation. And upcoming in a few weeks, in the middle of June, mid to late June, is an all advisory committees meeting, which is on June 21st, correct? Yes. And this is where we really close the loop, because we do consider council to be part of the stakeholders. So what we're interested in learning from each of you today and in the coming weeks is based on these results and the priorities that are expressed, what is it that council would like to learn more from citizens? And as part of that, what is it that council would like to include as areas that you have visibility and interest and knowledge of that you could share with us that will help us to be more successful doing all of this? Not all at once.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thanks, Leighton. And What I'll do is sort of open up the floor to members of council now to sort of provide some of that input. And, no doubt we'll get some of it today and some of it may follow after today. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I'm just going to specifically answer the question, what I would like to learn more through the next phases. One, I would like to understand how we can communicate better with the residents with regards to how we spend taxes. We ranked very low on that, so I'd like to understand better how they would like us to engage them. So that was one. I'd also like to understand for residents if they prefer using paying through user rates or through taxes to improve infrastructure, because it seems to be, it is a high priority regardless, and so I'd like to understand how they'd like to see that. The other two that I have that I didn't see because we were talking more about priorities, but I'd like to understand what city services they use the most and make sure we focus on the city service side, and then what city services are most important to them.
When you mentioned how at the beginning there, are you referring more to how, as in how much detail, through what media channels, or could you elaborate a little on that?
Not on how much detail, I don't think, but it came back that we aren't doing a good job at communicating how we use their tax dollars. Mm-hmm. So I want to understand how they would like us to communicate with them how we use their tax dollars.
Okay, so through like online?
Whether it's online, whether it's, through traditional media, just on our website, through social media, whatever it is. I know it's going to be a combination of a bunch of things, but I think it's important for us to ask that question because we scored fairly poorly on that one. So I think we need to understand how they want us to reach out to them.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. So a bunch of things. One of the questions that was asked was how you see Kitchener to benefit, right? Where do you want to see sort of dollars or considerations? And I'm wondering if the question might actually be posed as where do you see the improvements in the city benefit your family, benefit you? I think that you'll get a different response because I think and that's why we had, it was over 50% on the one where, 4%, 5%, 2%. That's why I think it was so broad. But if people are thinking of what we can do to improve your life, your family life, I think you'll get a different kind of response from people. What can we do as a city? A little bit concerned about the fact that people are feeling disengaged. So what does that mean to you as a citizen? Why do you feel disengaged? And, how can we engage you better, considering we've spent tens of thousands of dollars on engagement, including Environics? And I think getting the definition of what is value. What does value mean to you? Is it dollars and cents that is value for you? Is it how much time you can spend on at a particular event, maybe, or at a particular site? So at the park, because maybe you can't spend as much time at the park because you can't get there, or because the park is closed because it's been closed because there's work being done on it. So I think that value is a very interesting component. I'd asked earlier, I think, about the dissatisfaction. Maybe we need to understand I think we understand what satisfies people. I think this little mapping project is a good way of understanding what people want to see happen, but why are you dissatisfied? I think you'll get people answering that more than they will say, well, I'm happy because da-da-da-da-da-da. But you ask people why they're not happy, they'll tell you pretty quickly why they're not happy. I think it's important too for us to, this comment, listen and don't just go ahead and do something that most of the citizens don't want. You know, there's lots of positives on this advice to improve Kitchener. What do people mean by we're doing something that citizens don't want? What don't you want us to do? Again, it's turning the question around a little bit, and if people are upset about something and you give them an opportunity to expand on that, they will. If people are happy with something, they'll say, yeah, you know, it's good, it's okay. I've done surveys before, and that's why I'm kind of elaborating on that. And the other question I think we need to understand or define a bit better, what does economic development mean to you? Does it mean jobs? So I think, again, a definition, getting the definition from the people who are engaged. When you said it was planned, when are these roundtable discussions or focus groups planned?
In the next 2 months.
So you're going to be...
So finishing up by end of June?
Okay,
End of June.
so before everybody starts to break away for vacation time.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think that's really important. The challenge, I think, is that from mid-June onwards, we've got graduations, exams. People are very, very, very focused on that, preparing for that kind of stuff. And everybody, if it's nice weather, is out either playing soccer or ball or an outdoor sport. So I think we may have a bigger challenge getting people to these focus groups. What are we going to do to attract people or draw them into these focus groups?
Yeah, that's part of the planning, and it leads into a question I had for you as well about the value. We'd certainly be more expeditious in obtaining the results if we categorized the areas of input based on the data we already have from Environics versus leaving them open-ended. And the reason the open-ended, sure, you'll get a lot more information, but it's also a lot more effort to pull that information all together. So could you elaborate on where your leanings are on that?
Sure. You know what, I'll let others answer, and I'll just give it a little bit more of a narrow thought and then cue back in. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. And did you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. To clarify, I am supporting a subcommittee of Compass that is charged with the responsibility of planning the community engagement based on these results of Environics. So that subcommittee is digging deeper into what we've learned from Curtis's work in order to understand how we can design those community focus groups. The sentiment that the subcommittee has expressed is that people will be more likely to participate if those focus groups are topic-based and it resonates with them. We'll also work with communications staff to identify tactics to get the message out to people and create some excitement using Your Kitchener, Your Say as the tagline for this work. So as we move forward into the more detailed aspects of the engagement planning, now that we have the Environics results, we'll be able to identify tactics to encourage people to participate. Thank you.
Ms. Rav, you wanted to add something?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out in your package on page 2A66 is a timeline of events which focuses on when the community engagement will happen, the online engagement, which we took into consideration people's vacations and holidays. That's typically a better time for online engagement, and Jeanette spoke eloquently about the plans for the community focus groups.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Mayor Verbanovic. Thank you, Leighton, for your work on this, and please send our thanks from all of us to Compass Kitchener. So I think that the biggest question on my mind would be, okay, so now how should the city prioritize or work on these priorities? And so I think we need to specifically, in some cases, educate the focus group members just a tiny bit, at least, to scope the conversation. So I think there's a happy middle ground between totally having closed-ended questions, because that doesn't really work well in a focus group. It'll be rather short. Yeah. But totally open-ended might be less useful as well. So, for example, there's very limited scope on what we can do with regard to the environment. We can't. There are other levels of government, right, that have different jurisdictions on the environment. But there are things that the city can do. So if we talked about, here's what we've done, here's what we've talked about wanting to do more about in the environment, and what else could we do? That's the open-ended part. I'm just making suggestions about how to frame the question so that we get the most useful information out of those discussions. Yes. Similarly, with regard to how we communicate about the tax dollars and how we spend the tax dollars, I know that we have done in previous years through the budget cycle, we've done infographics, we've done videos, etc. And I wonder if it's a matter of making sure people get better access to those things, or if indeed those who have seen those feel like, well, it's still confusing, so make it more clear. I'd be interested to learn about that. And for this is a tight turnaround time. You've got such a short window here, and I'm just wondering, are you considering engaging volunteers to help with the facilitation of focus groups, and potentially even asking members of the community to hold discussions? Perhaps it's more of a question for Jeanette.
I'm going to defer to Jeanette on that.
Jeanette?
Thank you. The possible tactics to move forward will depend upon the groups that we're trying to reach out to. And we've had experience in the past of engaging volunteers, and it's challenging because it creates a constraint in our schedule, because we have to prepare the materials and train them then to execute on the engagement and to be prepared to facilitate. So it in some ways can enable us to go further in our reach, but it can add complications to our scheduling. So I think, again, this will come down to the importance of identifying who in the community we're trying to reach, and whether or not we have the capacity to work with our partners to have them engage on our behalf.
So when you led the engagement around Make It Kitchener, that was a much more extensive engagement process, I know, but I remember that you invited all of us and members of the community to host discussion groups and then share the feedback through. Would there be any opportunity in this case to do something perhaps on a lower scale, but to do something similar?
I don't want to jump to any conclusions on behalf of the subcommittee who is planning this work, but if there's an appetite to participate, I can take that feedback back to the subcommittee and determine if that is an avenue they'd like to go down.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I'll speak for myself, but I think it would be really great if you have your focus group questions picked out, and how you're going to do that, to share those with members of council, so that if they were interested, and I'm not trying to direct staff, I'm just making a suggestion, so maybe perhaps it requires more discussion, but that'd be something that would be interesting to me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Schneider.
Mayor Rivanovic, of interest to me would be paying for the priorities. So do we move things around within the budget, or is there an appetite for a slight increase in the taxes to pay for this? For example, when we were talking about sidewalk snow clearing, it came out, I believe, $26 per year for this to happen. Some people said, oh, for $26, go ahead and do it. But finding out how to pay for it, these priorities, are they important enough to have a tax increase to make them happen?
Yeah.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Interesting to note that a lot of the comments are asking for positive do's and stuff of that nature, and a lot of the information in here is that we should be trying to do this and trying to do that. It goes on and on. I'm taking the opposite position. What about don'ts? Don't do this or don't do that. I mean, you have here, stop wasting taxpayers' money on needless projects. What are they? I don't know. So one person's answer could be, yeah, don't do this, but the person says, yeah, we do want that. I'm just wondering how many of that is, I'm just, for the future to find out.
I don't think it's part of the tactics or part of the framework as part of those tactics, but it's definitely something that we'll take back as part of the subcommittee planning efforts, for sure.
Councillor Davey?
Thank you. Apologies, I stepped out for 1 second. I'm not going to provide. I'm sure there's enough in this document to put the questions together. But I've said this in the past. My concern, really, going forward, is I like other members of council, really rely on this data. And what we have before us now is statistically significant, so it's representative of the whole community. So the only feedback I would provide is make sure, if in any way possible, to ensure that you're reaching out as broadly. And honestly, the fewer set groups that are involved in this process, the better, because what ends up happening sometimes is we go from a representative sample to a sample that doesn't really reflect what we're seeing here. So if there's any way that we can be quasi-significant in terms of the selection process of this feedback we get, that's something that would carry a lot of weight with me. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Excuse me. I'm looking for something relatively simple. There's a lot of good information here, and you've twisted and turned it all different ways, which is good. If one wants to dig deep enough, they can get some information. I would really like to see just a straight-up list of priorities of our constituents. I'd like to have them say, you've got 100 points to allocate them in their own words too, rather than trying to lead them, and then when we get their words, maybe we can put them into categories. But I'd like to see one complete listing, 100 points, as to what our citizens would really like to see.
So if just to paraphrase back to make sure that I'm interpreting what you've said right, it would be more along the lines of a question, something like, if the city did nothing else for you but X, what would X be?
Well, I would actually like to ask them, you've got 100 points to allocate to what the priorities of the city are. Could you list in some order what your priorities are? You may allocate all 100 points to roads, pipes, and sewers. So you have 100 points to allocate. Okay. So that way we can see, you've done that in a way, but it's difficult to really look at the total picture when you've got all kinds of top priorities. I would like to really see a list, priorities 1 through whatever.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Leighton, I think what Councillor Gazzola is getting at is actually something that's been part of our budget consultation process in the past, where we've actually said to people, if you you basically have X number of dollars to play with, so $100, how would you allocate those $100? And from a different services point of view. So I think some of that information may actually be available from past work that our staff did as part of the budget process as well.
Okay.
Councillor Fernandez?
Okay. So Leighton, you wanted me to be a little bit more drilled down about what value was, right? Okay. So good value for tax dollars would mean, A, is it affordable to you and your family for programs or city services? And does value translate to the care of our parks, our snow removal, and our ability to access city services? I repeated myself on that. But that's kind of where I'm going, because if I think about some of the complaints I would get would be, oh my gosh, I paid this much in taxes and I haven't had my road cleared in 3 days. Or I paid this much in taxes and I got a parking ticket for parking in front of my house. So those are kind of the value for dollars that I hear people come back. Does that help?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay, those are all the comments from others. I guess I'll just add a few of my own. I would reiterate the comment that Councillor Davey made, that I really think it's important that as we go forward and we have this representative sample now, that we don't move to a point where we have an unrepresentative sample. And I think that is very key. And I think it's also important, and I appreciate where Councillor Fernandez is coming from in terms of defining value, because it may be different for different people. But I think we also need to be careful with any of these questions, that as we dig deeper into them, that we're not starting to try to get people to a certain answer, because that, I think, again, would defeat some of the purpose in terms of what we're trying to achieve. For me, I think there's two things that I would really like to see dug deeper, and I think this is something that Councillor Schneider may have raised, and it's the comment that you folks made on your page, sorry, on not you folks, but rather the Environics folks on page 14, that a growing proportion of residents now feel that the city should increase taxes at a higher rate in order to expand services. And that was something, that I did note in here, and it surprised me, to be quite frank. And I'd really like to understand, what does that mean? Where is it coming from? Is it because of the snow issue that, has, and the sidewalk issue, which has been in the media and people talk about that? Or is there something else that's bugging people that I think we need to factor in? The other piece, though, that's important, that I think we need to come to understand is where, the sections where those who are on the margins of our community socioeconomically, this survey in general suggests to me that it's something that we are aware of, and I think we've been trying to somewhat deal with, but I also think we probably need to do more to deal with, is the whole issues around gentrification and so on. And I think we see that playing out in terms of some of the responses in certain wards, in certain areas, and to dig deeper into that, and get the community's perspective on that, and how the community thinks that we can tackle that as well. Because it's one thing for us as policymakers, or the professionals that work in the organization, to have their suggestions, but it'd be interesting to get some feedback from the community on that.
Great, thank you.
So I think that's, does that cover off what you needed?
Yes, thank you.
It does. So I guess, Leighton, to both you and to Curtis, Curtis gets remunerated and his company gets remunerated for this, so thank you for, but this is a really important piece of work, and thank you for that. But more important to you, Leighton, and the rest of the committee, I can't say this enough anytime you folks come here. Thank you for the many, many hours you all put into the whole Compass Kitchener process. It is, I think, for me, when I talk about our strat plan process and the committee to other communities across the country and beyond, it's one of the things I take great pride in, because I think as a community, it's a very comprehensive process, from citizen leadership to obviously a professional survey, to all the work that you do around the biannual report card, and so on. And we couldn't do it without citizen members like you. So on behalf of council, please extend our heartfelt thanks to the rest of the committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, I also want to do one more thing. Don't leave yet, Lori Major. This is also, I think some people will know, some people don't know, that Lori is going to be retiring in the not-too-distant future. And this is probably our last chance that we'll see you at council or at committee. And so I really want to thank you on behalf of City Council and the corporation for your leadership, your guidance, your thoughtful approach to driving the whole strategic planning agenda, some of our initial sustainability work and in terms of getting the report that came forward a number of months ago, and other important work around the work plan and so on. We wish you all the best in your retirement and what it has to offer, and thank you for your service to the community. Yeah, so can we turn the sound down like 1 or 2 notches because we're getting a bunch of feedback. It's been getting sort of dingy. No, there we go. Yay. So we'll move right on to the draft Sustainable Urban Forestry Strategy and Mr. Schmidt. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon. We are pleased to present Kitchener's first draft Sustainable Urban Forest Strategy and launch the start of the public review process. This short presentation focuses on moving forward after an extensive community engagement and planning process. You will find the details in the staff report, the draft strategy, and other background documents available on the city's website. Today's presentation will include a short video partway through, and after a couple more slides, we'll follow that with 2 questions that staff have for council. The urban forest includes all of the trees growing on public and private lands, whether it is trees growing in the downtown, in older or newer neighborhoods. After talking with the community through the summer and fall, we know our residents like trees. We also know trees make communities better in many ways. Recognizing this, we developed the 10 ways trees help us to increase community awareness. It is because of the benefits the trees provide that a strong argument can be made to develop a sustainable urban forest program. Throughout this process, we have shown this graph about the costs, benefits, and life stages of large trees. In contrast to traditional assets like roads and sewers, trees provide their greatest benefits to the community when they are mature 40 or 60 years after they are planted. A key goal of a sustainable urban forest program is to maximize these benefits by keeping our trees healthy, resilient, and ensuring they live a long life. As part of this project, we also developed Kitchener's first Sustainable Urban Forest Report Card, based on a model used across North America. The 28 targets in the report card allows us to benchmark where we are today, identify actions that could be taken to develop a sustainable urban forest program, measure our future performance once the strategy is approved, and use it to compare ourselves with other municipalities. The results of the 2017 Sustainable Urban Forest Report Card show our current rating as being low to fair. This is not at all surprising, recognizing that we currently do not have a plan in place. We also carried out an extensive community engagement process for the summer and fall of 2017. During that time, we connected with more than 1,800 residents. We attended special events like the Cherry Park Festival. We attended neighborhood meetings, city events like the Kitchener Market, citizens committees, public tree walks, 2 community workshops, and we also carried out 2 work surveys. Out of the engagement process, we heard 5 key themes from the community and council. They are: the community recognizes the value and benefits of trees. They want us to sustain our existing urban forests by improving customer service, being proactive, and protecting trees. We also heard residents want to see the urban forest grow by increasing the canopy, providing programs to plant trees on private property, and to address the existing backlog of tree planting. Communicating better to our customers and providing more information was a constant message we heard. And following the energy bill through Love My Hood, residents told us they want to be involved in decisions and actions at the neighborhood and park level. Before we present Kitchener's first draft Sustainable Urban Forest Strategy, we will show you a short video that will be used to inform the community about the draft strategy and encourage them to tell us what they think about the draft. If we could show that video now, that'd be great. Thank you.
Surrounded by rapid change, I keep quietly still, unnoticed to many.
Yet, a changing climate means you are more important to our well-being than ever.
I shared life with your mother's great-grandfather.
And you'll be there for my children's great-grandchildren.
You need my shelter and shade.
As do many other living things that call you home.
I offer communities health and even wealth.
You give us beauty and bounty.
I improve the air you breathe.
And the soil we play on.
I can do all of this because you give life to me.
You do all of this for us, but we also need to take care of you too.
Trees are part of the fabric of our city, our green infrastructure. Maintaining that infrastructure contributes to our social, economic, and environmental well-being. But to continue to receive the benefits of the urban forest, we need to actively plan and manage it. We're proud to share a draft of Kitchener's first Sustainable Urban Forest Strategy with you. Take a look.
That's awesome.
Thank you. So we intend to use that video over the next 8 weeks to encourage residents to make them aware of the strategy, but also to encourage them to tell us what they think of the draft and provide their comments and engage. I will now introduce you to the draft strategy. Our vision for a sustainable urban forest has been developed by the community, and it says, Kitchener's urban forest will be healthy and resilient, benefiting its residents and the environment today and into the future. Our goal, a message we have talked about throughout this process, is to maximize the economic, environmental, and social benefits of the urban forest while minimizing the associated costs and risks. The 5 branches of a sustainable urban forest are: plan first, the cornerstone of a sustainable and resilient urban forest; engage often and widely, building critical support, collaboration, and stewardship; maintain proactively to increase health, longevity, and resiliency; protect prudently to maintain what we already have; and plant correctly and deliberately, ensuring future generations a vibrant tree canopy. For the 5 branches of a sustainable urban forest, we have identified 15 action items based on input from the community, council, and the report card. I will now summarize the actions for each branch. For plan, 4 actions are identified. They are: plan for a sustainable urban forest, address key gaps, manage the urban forest on city lands as a corporate asset, and develop a sustainable natural management plan for all city-owned natural areas. For engage, 3 actions are identified. They are: increase community awareness and stewardship, embrace Love My Hood, and increase communication and build collaboration. For maintain, 3 action items are identified, and they are: improve customer service, create a proactive maintenance program for city trees, and create an emergency an urban forest emergency response and recovery plan. For protect, there are 2 actions identified, and they are conserve and protect the urban forest prudently on public and private lands, and monitor and assess destructive tree pests and invasive species. And finally, for plant, there are 3 actions identified, and they are set a tree canopy target and develop a long-term plan, work with the community to develop a nonprofit tree planting and stewardship program, and develop a tree planting and soil management plan for trees for city lands. This ends the overview of the draft strategy. In the staff report, the next steps for this project are identified. Today we are presenting the draft strategy to Council and starting the public review process of the draft that will continue for the next 8 weeks ending June 29th. With this being an election year, staff will bring the final draft report strategy back to the new Council in January or February of 2019. And once approved, staff will return shortly after with the implementation plan that will guide the work for the next 5 to 10 years. This concludes the staff's presentation. We would now like to use the remaining time to ask 2 questions and hear your feedback. We ask the 2 questions we have for you separately. The first question is, with the release of the draft strategy, does Council have any questions or comments on the strategy itself?
Okay, great. We have a number of people who have... Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, Dave, this is that picture of the young lady hugging the tree. You should have put me right in there, but it's okay. I'll let her have the accolades. Sorry, I just had to throw a joke in. As a tree hugger, and you and I have had many conversations and some lovely walks back in the woods behind my property, that I talk often about how we need to protect our trees. So one of the questions I have is, under the Protect banner, are we going to be looking for greater consequences and responses to tree removal? So we've had incidences of tree removal on large tracts of land, but we also have tree removal that happens on city property adjacent to private residences. So I know we have tree management plan, and I know that some of that comes into play when we have site development, but I would like to see us be much more proactive and responsive when we see tree removal happen.
And to answer that, one of the actions that we have identified under that section is actually to, at some point in the future, undertake a review of how we protect trees on city lands and also how we protect trees on private lands. There are a number of things that we do now, as you've mentioned, and there are some other opportunities. They all come with different pros and cons to them. So it is one of the action items that we have. The strategy itself is a big picture, so we've identified all the things we should work on. And that's one of the things that, even based on what the community said, that we're saying it is an action that we should move forward with, and that, but it's along with the other 14 that are listed.
Right. When we have new subdivisions happen, people are often quite enthusiastic about having a tree planted on the boulevard, yet we do have citizens who say, no, please, I don't want a tree on my boulevard. Do we or will we, through this strategy, take those no's, for example, and translate those into park? I mean, we're going to have trees planned for those properties. Will we take trees from those properties and plant them in other locations where we may see a diminishing canopy?
And I think I can answer that sort of in 2 ways. First of all, with new subdivisions, we're facing huge challenges because everything is becoming such more intensified and there's much more competition. So the old idea of where we did have room at one point to plant a tree within front of every residential property no longer exists. So that's in itself is a challenge that we have to work with and look at. The other part of it is that one of the recommended actions too is that we would go forward and then set a tree canopy target and then develop a plan to implement that. So that really is sort of the way to answer, like, rather than just, we need to do those things, do some of that planning ahead of time, because even setting canopy cover goals, they could be very different from neighborhood to neighborhood depending on opportunities and challenges. So it's like setting those in place and then seeing what is the best way to achieve that. But truthfully, too, the biggest opportunities throughout this is on private property, because that's where most of the space is available. So.
And that was leading to my next question was, if we don't have room on boulevards anymore, will we be adding to the program when we engage with citizens for a grant program or some way of compensating people to say, well, if you because we can't put a tree on your boulevard now, but if you put one on your property, you will get, X, for example. Is that part of the whole engage in the plan?
Yes, and again, one of the actions identified is and we also do have the corporate project to develop to look at tree planting on private land. So through the summer and fall, we are going to be looking at those different options. We heard from a lot of residents that, identified just what you're saying. They would like some assistance or even information on how to do those things. So there's a lot of different options based on what other communities are doing. So those are things we'll look at and then bring back for consideration.
Okay. Just sort of a comment, and it is definitely identified in your plant, that when I was out at Kiwanis Park for the Earth Day event, and we had hundreds of trees that were planted, but unfortunately there was no instruction given. And I know that some of the people who were volunteering there said, this is lovely that we've got 20 trees planted, but out of the 20 trees that are planted here, we've got to replant 15 of them. So I think it's critical that we do allow non-for-profit groups or community groups to plant, that they are given some very clear educational tips, whether it's somebody standing there and saying, okay, this is how you do it, because we want those trees to survive. I mean, there's no point in planting them if a percentage of them are going to die. So, I think we've got a good start on the strategy. I know that it's taken a lot of work and a lot of hours, and I see, and all of a sudden your name just escapes, Miranda here, who has been out in the community quite a bit. So thank you for doing that, taking all that information and putting it in this.
Okay, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor Vrivanovic. Thank you for this excellent report, and thank you for the input you got from all of council as well on this going into it. I'm hoping during the public engagement part of this, as we look at the themes, theme 3, addressing the length of time it takes to replace a tree once removed. I know that's probably one of the number one concerns I hear about the tree. And residents will refer to as a boulevard tree as my tree, which is a great sense of pride for them. So they would say, my tree was removed. Then a little while later, someone came to stump it, and then it still hasn't been replanted. So hopefully getting input on how best to do that, replace it as quickly as possible. And again, I understand that resources would come into that. But are we able to get input on that from our citizens when we go out?
We certainly could look at that, because we're going to get into that discussion sort of with the next question with the 4 priorities, because one of them was the whole identifying customer service. So there's a bunch of things like you're suggesting and other things that we're looking at, and those are things that we're looking at starting to look at and move forward with, in the short term. So.
Okay, and then under theme 5, recognizing the city and community must work together for a sustainable urban forest. I would expect that there'd be input taken in on that and citizen suggestions how we can best do that, and maybe help give them incentive to plant on private property.
And I think with the work that we're looking at, we haven't completed the work plan yet, but we've had some discussions about it. But in terms of that whole topic of how to look at tree planting on private property, we do intend to have some workshops and some other things through the summer and fall to bring people together we've already heard a lot from what they've said, but to hear more from what they're looking at and thinking about with that. So.
Great, thank you. Thanks for this great report.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I'm going to start with just a couple comments. I think that this is a fantastic document that was super easy to read, and so I thank you for that. I agree. I'm kind of putting all of mine in one because I had a hard time differentiating between the questions. I was excited to see that we're looking at proactive measures and incentive programs. And I would be sad if we ever got to a point where we weren't putting trees on boulevards. I know that we're decreasing space, but I think we have to decrease yards before we decrease boulevard space, and we need trees. I think that's a staple in our community, and we need to continue to do it. And so I think that we have to make sure through our development and planning process that there is enough space, not for maybe the trees of, 40 years ago that we used to plant, but at least some sort of tree that might not be as big in stature, because I would be sad if we started building streets that had no boulevard trees. And that wouldn't be something I'd want to be a part of. But my question to you then is, was planting of more substantial trees in new subdivisions discussed, as well as parks? We hear a lot of, especially with new parks with no shade, and can we look at more substantial trees?
And that, yeah, we heard, one of the biggest things we heard from residents, especially specific to parks, was the desire for more shade. And certainly for shade, we need to grow bigger trees than that. But as you know, and depending on which part of the city, we have different challenges with soils and with the ability of planting. So the one initiative action that we've identified to develop a plan for tree planting, we're also identifying the soil management. So, because truthfully, we need to do some work in some parks before we plant trees. So we're looking at, putting that plan together so that we have different strategies, approaches for different areas so that we can look at working on those things. And we've also done some work already with improving some of the soil requirements in subdivisions, so we're looking at expanding that to deal with all of that, because truthfully, we can't grow trees without soil.
Right. But even understanding that we have a number of parks that we may need to retrofit with bigger trees, is this something that we can put in policy to happen in new parks as they are developed, so that it's part of the park?
We certainly are looking at, recognize that we have to look and review at all of those things of how they're being done and what we need to change to make those things better.
But that'll be part of the strategy moving forward?
Well, it sort of covers both pieces. A part of it's within the development manual, which we have addressed to a degree. So there are new soil standards for the newest parks. The challenge is that the timing for when things come on, a lot of things have already, we're in the process, so they're not applying to those new standards. But we are looking at making some additional improvements to that too.
Yeah, I think it's important that this strategy can also inform the development document, and if there's anything we can do to increase the wording and strength in the development document, I think that would be important as well, and I'd like to see that come through with the implementation plan at the appropriate time. So I'm done number 1 and 2, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Galloway-Seelock. And if others want to take Councillor Galloway-Seelock's lead and answer both of them at the same time, that would be fine as well. Sorry? It was in your report? Sorry. So the second question, maybe we can just pop it onto the screen just so that
certainly
people who want to.
So just in terms of the second question, within the staff report, staff had identified 4 priorities. The first was to address areas of risk. The second was to address some key gaps that we've identified in terms of needing to do some specific planning, whether it's to improve tree planting or to collect data so that we can better manage the asset. The third has already been noted by a number of councillors, the need to improve customer service, whether it's the length of time it takes for us to respond to a call or how long it takes to get work completed. And the final piece was recognizing the strong interest is to continue work that we've already started to support tree planting on private lands, to look at what options we can have, looking at what other cities are doing in that. So recognizing that, what we're asking also from council in terms of these 4 identified priorities is whether council agrees with the 4 that we have identified, and also whether there are other priorities that council thinks that we should consider at this time.
Okay, so as we move forward, if you do have any questions of staff, which was question 1, or comments, and then question 2, your thoughts on this, just to make sure that we get through this in a timely manner and folks have an opportunity to grab some dinner during break before we have the arrival of our students at 6 o'clock. So Councillor Gazzola, you're up next.
Yeah, very simple. I think you've done a good job, staff, done the kind of a job that I expect their staff to do. Thank you. I don't have any problems with your priorities. My one simple question is that the process is that whoever's sitting around this horseshoe next January, February, whenever it is, will approve the final strategy. Okay, and then you're going to bring forward detailed information, cost estimates, and the proposed prioritization. I would like to see, when we're studying the strategy, detail and what are the costs. I mean, that to me, that's part of the of planning the strategy. Here, if the costs are a certain thing, here's the direction we can go in. If the costs are different, I don't understand how we can approve a strategy without really putting some figures to it. That's my only point. As far as your priorities, they're all excellent. They're all important. It's hard to. I'd like to lean on customer service as being very important, but it's hard to say which one is the most important. Again, if we have a barrel of money that we were to apply, we can decide what is needed where, and where do we go, or do we chip off a little bit at a time. So that's my points. Thank you.
Ms. McGoldrick, you wanted to add something?
Yes. Through you, Mayor, Councillor Gazzola raises a good point in terms of the importance of bringing forward information to Council regarding the details in the implementation. So the intent would be that the Sustainable Urban Forest Strategy is a very long-term, long-looking plan, and really the details in the implementation plan, to Councillor Gazzola's point, is how quickly we want to move forward, or how measured in pace we want to be. And so our intent would be to bring forward those options, particularly related to the near-term implementation actions that we would be recommending to Council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davey, you're up next.
Thank you. I would echo my other fellow councillors' comments. This was a great read and very easy to understand. I don't have any particular concern with the priorities either. I do have just a couple comments that you may be aware of, but in terms of the boulevard tree planting, obviously the type of tree is one major issue, because I've heard residents concerned in the past about maybe trees that drop sap, for example, that would go in their automobiles. Another one is trees that will eat into sewage lines, because once someone has sewage blockage once, they never forget it, and sometimes they don't want a tree on their boulevard because it can cause that sort of issue. So ways to address that, I think, would be critical in getting more acceptance. I do have a question on the canopy, though. And with respect to the report card, I thought the report card was okay considering you don't even have a strategy, but it is pretty low considering our canopy. How does our canopy compare to other municipalities? Like, for example, I thought London had a lower tree canopy than our current percentage, and they call themselves the Forest City.
I don't have the exact numbers handy with me, but I believe London was a little bit less than we were, and that was a concern to their council because they were called the Forest City. Having said that, at the same time, the City of New York has 36% canopy cover. The City of Toronto has about the same as we do, 26 or 24, 25. We're very comparable to Cambridge, and and I think Mississauga has a lower number than us. And when we talk about canopy cover, like setting a goal, I think it's really important to understand too that we're not necessarily advocating that we have to increase the canopy. It could be just a decision to say we want to stick with 26%. A lot of municipalities have moved to 40%, and even now they're advocating for this area 40 to 60%. But the point is to do a plan to show the options and show the costs and the effort to require to get there, because any kind of canopy increase is a huge effort. So it's ideally we would set a plan first rather than just setting a goal and then thinking of trying to achieve it. So there's a lot of options that could be achieved.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so I would agree. I think more is definitely better, but I think it's good that we're starting in a pretty good place. But yeah, I have no other concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ioannidis, you're up next.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. And David, thank you for all the work that you do with this. I know we've had lots of discussions over this over the years, and for myself personally, I think this should be a really top priority for the next council moving forward. So I'm going to address both questions. In particular, with the priorities, when we look at customer service in here, does that include like the maintenance, proactive maintenance?
It includes a number of things. So one is just providing more information, better communication. It includes having a better, even defined response times for certain things. But it also, there's clear limits as to what we can do with just that. So it also includes a proactive maintenance program that has different options that can provide different service levels going down the road. Or it can also include things such as, reducing the length of time it takes to plant a tree, or changing the options that there may be more than one option of how those trees are planted. So it's a very encompassing area.
Okay. Yeah, my next question kind of addresses again the priorities, but also with question one, and it deals with, I would like to see under priorities how we're going to fund this. In particular, the way I look at it is I can envision, like, we have KW Hydro come here every year and give us a check for $40,000 for tree planting. I would love to see us do a sponsorship program or something like that with other companies within the community that will gladly donate monies to help support this program. So that I would love to see as a priority. And also, I know we've had this discussion before, and I know you're very keen on this, looking at grassroots organizations as well as to help them and maybe partner up with other organizations to help implement this plan, I think is important. And then finally, what I would like to see on the next steps is what would this cost to implement this plan fully, and then go down from there. And that way I think we could get a better sense of what this actually entails, because previously we've had the environmental studies state that the environment's important and the costs with that is important. So I think this is something that's going to be rather important to the community going forward. So I would like to see that detailed cost of how we can implement this plan in whatever stages or whatever it is that you guys see as fit.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. So just to follow up on Councillor Ioannidis' point that, the community, as you sat through and listened, the community has identified the environment as one of our top priorities. And I see this strategy as being a very important and tangible way that we can address that priority and really try harder to be more assertive in addressing it, using and putting our money where our mouth is. So I would be concerned if we don't try to approve this strategy until after the budget is decided on for 2019, because then we're just waiting. longer. And so, to Councillor Hernandez's point again, I would like to see options in the next budget cycle that would look at how could we close that gap in the service levels for, pruning damaged trees or taking off the dead limbs where we have requests from throughout the city. But also, how can we be more proactive in a more timely manner? If this is this is an incredibly long-term strategy, but how can we get to a better place more quickly, and how much money would it cost? I think it is an important piece. We're going to be raising the expectations of the community members as we outreach to them now. And then if we wait and wait and wait, it's going to be another example where, unfortunately, we have such a long-term planning strategy, but members of the community might lose their faith that we're going to be more proactive in achieving the goals unless we. Anyway, I'm just inviting you to tell us how urgent is this matter, and what are the ways that we can perhaps add budget to fix it. So, and is there an opportunity even in 2018 to do this? I don't understand why this is an election, why we're waiting until after the election, when it's actually not a political thing. The community has told us that the environment is important, trees are important. Is there an opportunity in 2018 even to increase the budget for this issue?
Ms. McGoldrick, you clicked in.
So through you, Mayor, it is our intent to look at the implementation year beginning in 2019 and using 2018 really continuing on with the planning and the detailed analysis of the costing, as you've noted. And so using those 4 priorities, and that's why we wanted to bring these forward to Council today, we'll be using that to look at what those short-term priorities are for the implementation actions, and providing information through the budget process as well. So we have tried to line up the timing such that information related to implementation, strategy, final strategy implementation, and the 2019 budget are aligned as closely as possible.
Mm-hmm. And what about for 2018? Are there any opportunities for us to see some improvement in the service levels?
So through you, Mayor, I think in terms of what we could do in 2018, and I'm hesitant to commit because we just experienced a significant windstorm, and we know that this year that will take some time to recover from, and a lot of our resources will be going into that recovery action. I think what we can do this year relates to the planning, and so we talked about, one of the actions under maintain relates to creating more rigorous emergency response and recovery plans. I think that will be an area of focus, looking at the work and engaging with the community around the incentive program to plant on private lands. That's a body of work this year. We're continuing on with replanting efforts associated with the emerald ash borer tree removal. But we will not be able to accelerate that this year because it requires more funding and resources in 2018 to do more planting. But we're continuing on with existing programs and really setting the stage in 2018 to be ready to go in 2019.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next we have Councillor Fernandez, please.
So just want to be quick because I did take more time on my first question. The other, when I look at the protect page, I think that's where I think we have to have a priority. We want to increase our canopy, but before we can increase our canopy, I think we have to protect the existing trees. So whatever it takes to protect those trees that we have, whether they're on private or public property, I think we have to find a way to do that, whether it's tree management or serious consequences for large tract tree removal. The other thing, of course, is education. When we're, and that's also part of the, I see that's also part of the planning and the protecting, is educating people. Why do we have a green bag around your tree in front of your property? Because we want that tree to survive. And this is the cost of that tree. And if we don't take care of it, this is the cost for us to replace it. And I think, again, looking at the Environics survey, dollars and cents make affect our citizens. And if you put it in dollars and cents, the amount of water that as a citizen you provide, and I think that was really important. When somebody came to me last year and said, oh, it's costing me, why am I paying all of this money to water this tree? And I think when I figured it out, it was $10 for the entire year. I mean, it was pitiful. And I think I made my point. But that education about protecting and saving our existing trees is really important. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I had two other thoughts that came to me while I was waiting here, and actually one's kind of in line with what Councillor Fernandez just said with regards to protect, but that we need to have stronger penalties or approach when there are a large amount of trees removed and clear cut. We've seen some of that recently, not planned and not done. So I think we need to have stronger policies so that people don't just go ahead and do that. I'm seeing it quite frequently right now. And then to go on that is a stronger policy on tree removal and tree replacement for new builds, whether that be an infill build or a new subdivision. You know, I know everyone says you cut down one, you plant two, but they're completely different types of trees and they're completely different stature trees. So I think we need to work on the policy of that as well in order to protect and maintain our urban forest.
Thank you. That appears to be all of the inputs, so I'll just add my own. I too want to thank you and the team that have worked on this. The entire document, I think, was, as Councillor Ioannidis said, I mean, this is an outstanding document. It is easy to read, and the video, I think, will really provide a meaningful way for citizens to engage with this and why it is important. I think generally speaking, a lot of people understand it, or at least notionally, but this really puts some reality to it all. I think, you know, for me, you know, starting to think about some of our older trees and how we're going to replace those in those sections of the city is going to be important, because that's what makes some of those sections majestic. And thinking about, you know, not only the new areas where we need to plant in, but also how, you know, maybe we phase some of the replacement in those areas so that we don't go from all to nothing, but maybe some sort of transition is going to be key. On the customer service end, I mean, I think some of this will fit in nicely with our broader customer service work that we're doing as a corporation. And then coming out of that, really service standards in terms of when people can expect to, you know, once they actually do report it, what's realistic, you know, and obviously the council, when this report comes forward, is going to have to look at that from a resource point of view, because, you know, if you want things done within 2 months versus 2 years, there's a different resource level attached to that. And so council will have to grapple that with that. I think there is more that we can do from a collaboration point of view, whether it is with the private sector, whether it's with potential donors, whether it's with you know, people like TD Canada Trust Friends of the Environment and other groups around tree planting. And I know I think we've done a good job of going after some of that stuff. I think we can probably there's probably some additional work we can do in that regard, which might help us achieve some of our goals going forward. And I think finally, on the in speaking to that last piece, under the engage section, item number 6, which is the connection with Love My Hood and creating, you know, walkable, livable neighborhoods that folks are proud of. often one of the things that they do talk about is their trees and so on, and so how we can blend some of that programming together, I think would be helpful. Councillor Fernandez, you still had something you wanted to
Just
add?
a quick question,
Yeah,
actually.
go ahead.
Only because I noticed again that we were talking about engagement in the next 8 weeks. Is there any opportunity, or is it possible to, because our Compass Kitchener is going out to the public, is there any way we can do cross-pollination here with somebody who can attend some of these focus groups to offer opportunities for input on this strategy? I just thought we're going to be putting people together anyways. Is there a way for us to make the most of those people's time?
Ms. McGoldrick?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. It's a great suggestion, and we'll take that back to the Compass Kitchener team and explore what opportunities there may be to do that.
Okay, I think that's it. Again, thank you very much for all of your great work in this regard. We have one more item, folks, 2 more items actually on the agenda that we need to deal with. And the first one is the sponsorship agreement for RBJ Schlegel Park at 1955 Fisher-Hallman Road. And I think we, as council knows, we passed a motion just prior to that being announced in the State of the City speech. And we just have to formalize it now with the name of the corporation, or with the family rather. So I will turn it over to Councillor Galloway-Seelock to bring that motion forward.
Yeah, I'd like to move the recommendation to proceed forward, and if I can just make a brief comment.
Now let me just get a seconder first.
Sure.
Councillor Ioannidis. Okay.
Go ahead. I just think, or I believe that this is a historic partnership. I'm excited that the Schlegel family has come forward to put their name on the park, on the South District, Kitchener District Park. The Schlegels are a community-minded family with impacts locally, provincially, and nationally, and even globally. $2.3 million over 40 years is a good deal for the city. I know that this will be a catalyst, and there will be more partnership agreements to come. I just quickly want to publicly thank staff for all their work in bringing this to fruition. I know that it took a little time, but I thank them for all their time and energy in making this happen, and I ask for a recorded vote.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I just want to, is it over 40 years? The sponsorship is for 40 years. They're paying for it over 10 years.
That's correct.
Yeah, no, the other, yeah, okay, let's see. No, the other question I had is why is there HST on that? Is it not a donation?
Mr. Lautenbach.
Through the mayor, because they are getting something from this sponsorship, so they are getting advertising as part of putting their name on the actual park. There's HST that applies as part of that. A donation would just be donating it without any expectation of getting something back in return.
Okay.
I think those are probably rules that we don't make, but other orders of government do, and unfortunately that's no doubt there have been examples elsewhere where probably that's been interpreted that way, I would presume. Mr. Chapman, you want to comment on that?
Through the chair, you're correct. So those would be CRA guidelines, which are fairly well established, and I would not offer tax advice here, but I believe that they're able to claim a rebate or an input tax credit based on the fact that they sell products taxably as well.
Correct. Councillor Fernandez.
Just a question. This is for the 40 years. What about the additional timelines that have been discussed about future acreages in the park? This does not cover that.
Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if the city would at some future date secure additional lands for the park name would be extended to those lands.
That's where I have a bit of a problem.
Okay, Councillor Davies?
So, point of clarification, I think the question was, does it expand beyond the 40 years? So if we acquire land in 20 years, they would only get the balance of those lands for the following 20.
Mr. Mayor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Davey is correct. After 40 years, the name is up for resale to someone else.
But I think Councillor Fernandez's question was in regards to if additional lands are added onto the park, and as discussed, they would be included. Okay, so a recorded vote has been called. Those in favor? Opposed? Oh, Councillor Yanetsky, you didn't vote?
What I meant to is the lights went out before I pushed the button. So I'm in favor.
Okay, let's do that again, though, so that the records reflect that accordingly. So we all have to vote again. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion for 3 readings. Moved by Councillor Fernandez, second by Councillor Schneider. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Ioannidis, Councillor Schneider. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Pictures with each of them in the 6 to 6:30 half hour. You can give them your final pointers and so on. So each of you will get your picture with your person. They come at 6, and at 6:30 we do the 6:30 to 7 is the special council.